Okay. Just to make certain, because we have some newbies in here and we have some people that's not a part of the homeless family, just to make sure we understand Section 725 of the McKinney-Vento Law, I'm going to reiterate just what homelessness is and how we define homelessness as a school district. Now, I'm not going to read all this to you, but if you look up here and you notice that when you're talking about homeless education, there is a specific group of children that are eligible under ESSA. Remember, there was an amendment, and when those amendment came down, the law had to go back and give us a clear-cut definition or who is eligible for homeless services in states. Now, when we talk about homeless, and you are the ones that's been in the trenches for a while, understand that it means those children who lack a fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residency. And as I get into my part, we're going to talk more about fixed, regular, nighttime residency. Now, I want you to marinate on that. While you marinate on that, I'm going to give you some housekeeping rules. Okay, we will take questions from the floor. There are some sticky tabs on your table. If you have some questions that you don't have to have answered now, if you just kind of wave your hand, and we have our ladies in the back, let's introduce them. We got Nicey, we got Debbie Bolden, we have Trina Slappy. Those are our TAs for the homeless department. I'm sorry, Barbara's here? I'm sorry. And Barbara McCoy is here. Okay, so if you just wave those, they'll come and get them, and we'll stick those on the wall, and I'll send out a F, A, and Q later on. But if something we can answer now, we will. We'll take 3 questions from the floor, and I think we have an online audience, and we'll take 3 questions online. So whoever is monitoring the chat online, if you just wave something to let me know that you have a question, I'll stop and answer those. Okay? If you need to go to the restroom, feel free to just walk out and leave. It's out the doors to my far right, around the corners, okay? So make sure you know where that is. One thing I wanted you all to pay attention to is our homeless logo. Alabama has their own homeless logo now. So whenever you see this sign or whenever you see this logo, this is exclusive for the state of Alabama. I was so tired of going on the internet trying to find homeless information. Everybody had a logo but Alabama. So I created our own logo, so a lot of information that you'll get going forward will bear the Alabama logo on it. Okay, so let's clap because we now have a logo. Okay, now, when we're talking about kids that are homeless, just like the law said, it's the children and youth who are sharing the housings of other persons due to the loss of housing, your economic hardship, or similar reasons. Those kids that are living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, and I always stick a pin in trailer parks, okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Or those campgrounds due to the lack of alternative accommodations, are living in emergency or transitional shelters or abandoned hospitals. You also talk about those children and youth who have a primary nighttime residence that's a public or a private place, not used as an ordinary living place for humans. Children and youth children and youth who are living in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, or substandard housing, train station, or similar settings. Let's talk about substandard housing. I always want to stop there because a lot of times that's where we miss a lot of our kids because we really don't understand substandard housing. What I tell liaisons, always check with your community or your city ordinance just to make certain you understand what substandard housing looks like. I know in rural Alabama, you can go to some places where there's still outdoor plumbing, okay? There's still no running water. Some people still use candles for light. So whenever you get in a situation or you have a kid in that situation, in my mind, that's substandard housing because we know that has a psychological and a social impact on the child. So make sure you're understanding substandard housing. In some cases, if it's a one-family dwelling, there's a certain amount of children that, if you look at the ordinance, a certain amount of people that can live in those dwellings. So look at those things, because sometimes it could be a two-room house and you have 5 or 6 children. You have to ask yourself, do these kids have a bed to sleep in? Is some of the children sleeping on the floor? So just be very cautious and be very conscious when you're talking about substandard housing. Is the house infested with mold, mildew, those things that can contribute to a child being absent from school, okay? So always think about substandard housing. Turn to your city ordinance. And in some cases, you can visit. You know, I've gone to some places before just to make certain I understand what substandard housing looks like in a particular community. And then, of course, you have your migratory children, okay? First of all, it'll be a homeless child that qualifies under lacking a fixed, regular nighttime residency. And then by virtue of Section 1309 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the child is a migratory student. So make sure we understand who we're talking about when we're deeming children homeless, okay? Okay, I get a lot of calls about the unaccompanied homeless youth. Are the unaccompanied homeless youth homeless? Do they qualify for services? Okay, I provided you all with a visual, okay? First of all, in order to be a UHY, you first have to meet the definition of homelessness. You have to lack a fixed, regular nighttime residency. And then you have to not be in the custody of a parent or a legal guardian, okay? If a child has both of those elements, then that child might qualify for McKinney-Vento resources and services, okay? So always understand, because some kids will show up and they have a stable house, but grandma or somebody, the child might be living with them. So just make sure you understand that the child has to meet the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness and not be in the legal custody of a parent or a guardian to meet UHY status. Okay. Okay. Fixed, regular, and adequate. Okay, when we talk about fixed, regular, and adequate, the law did a great job explaining what fixed, regular, and adequate looks like. Okay, when we talk about fixed, we talk about, is this stationary? Is it permanent? Is it not subject to change for a child? When we talk about regular, is it used on a predictable, routine, a consistent basis? I always think about the permanency of this dwelling or this place for a child. Is it adequate? You know, we talked about substandard housing. Lawfully and reasonable sufficient. And when you're talking about sufficient, you have to think about, does this dwelling or does this place meet the psychological and physical needs of a child? Take, for example, a home that doesn't have running water. We all know that children, you know, their esteem can easily be damaged by peers. So if it's a situation where this family doesn't have running water and this child needs to bathe, then this child can benefit from McKinney-Vento services. I've used a hotel before where I knew a child didn't have running water, and I made a contract or did a contract agreement with the local hotel, and this child had first period where he could go and take a bath at this hotel, change clothes, and come back to school. Because I knew if he was around his peers, there were going to be some issues, okay? So I always think about those things. I always ask yourself, can the student go to the same place, which is fixed, every night, which is regular, to sleep in a safe and sufficient space, which is adequate, okay? Those are the operative words. And if you can answer yes to all of those things, this child might not be eligible for McKinney-Vento services, okay? If you can't, then this child could be eligible for McKinney-Vento services. Next slide, okay. Okay, I'm not certain if everybody knows that we have a state plan, and I'm not even certain if you know where to find the state plan. But Alabama does have a state plan. As a matter of fact, we were required to amend our state plan about a couple years back. And with this state plan, we had to add some things. So if you don't know where the state plan is, the link is provided. Make sure you look at the state plan in its entirety, because the state plan says what the state has in place for homeless education. And a lot of the district policies and procedures should mirror the state plan. So when Jason and his team comes out, or even when a lawyer wants to, start some litigation about homelessness, the first thing they're going to want to know, are we following our state plan? Okay, so make sure you look at your state plans, you look at your dispute resolution, and I have dispute resolution up there because that's one of those areas that I really get concerned to make sure that we are following a plan, so when the disputes do come, it's in our favor, okay? So one thing in particular with the dispute resolution, I want you all to take the time when you go back to your room or go back to your LEAs and look at the timeline that's provided in the state plan. I think at the state level, it only gives us 5 days to make a turnaround decision, okay? So if you're looking at your policies and procedures in your LEA and you're taking 30 days, 10 days, then you're gonna be out of compliance, because you don't want a child to be sitting there or in an LEA and then you take 30 days to make a decision. You're probably gonna lose, because that child has established friends, that child has started earning grades. So if that child is not supposed to be in that LEA, he'll probably stay, because you've kind of made him or her stable. Okay, so look at your policies and procedures to make sure what you read in the state plan kind of aligns with what we've said is going to happen at the state level. Okay. Another area we see a lot of conversation, or have a lot of conversation about, is our set aside. Okay, here are the 2 questions we have to ask ourselves about set aside. Okay, does ESEA require an LEA to reserve Title I funds under Section 113C3 if all schools in the LEAs are Title I schools? Yes. Does ESEA require an LEA to reserve a specific amount of Title I funds to ensure homeless students under Section 113C3? Okay, the answer is no. We don't have a formula for the set-aside. We always go back to reasonable and necessary when we think about what is going to be set aside. When the applications come to the state level, a lot of times I might see $5 set aside, I might see $10 set aside. Think to yourself, is that reasonable? If you have identified 10 kids, $5 per child. So I always use a needs assessment to determine what your LEA is going to set aside for homeless students. Have a conversation with the CSFO. It should be a collaborative effort to look at your numbers, to look at past practices, to make certain that the practices are similar or they're around what you've done before, okay? I always make sure it's something reasonable, okay? Like I said, there's no formula, but it does raise an eyebrow when we see an application and we see $10 set aside, and then there are 300 kids identified in the LEA. Okay, I know some people will say, well, we get the grant. I've read that. We're gonna get the McKinney-Vento sub-grant. Well, you don't know for certain that you're gonna get the McKinney-Vento sub-grant because it's a competition. And one thing about setting aside more than enough, you can always go back and amend those applications. So be safe and do something reasonable and something that makes sense when it's time to set aside those funds for the needs of those homeless students, okay? Next slide. So, when ESTA made their amendments, here are the things that they either added, updated, or they took out when it came to set aside. Okay, of course, they removed the language. Remember, in the past, set asides were for those kids who were not in Title I schools. It was to service those kids. So they removed that from the language. Okay, they made it explicit that an LEA may determine the reservation amount. We give you the autonomy to make your decisions on how much you want to set aside, but it needs to be based on a needs assessment. Okay, it clarifies how this reservation can be used. I get a lot of questions about, well, we got the money set aside, what can it be used for? And I want to just, I'm gonna emphasize this. Set-asides can be used for transportation if it's a supplement. But if you are running a bus just for homeless kids and it's not supplementing, then you cannot use Title I funds, because transportation is a requirement of a school district. So don't put in your application, please don't put in your application, these funds are going to be used for solely used for transportation of homeless kids. Okay, it has to be supplemental. Okay? All right, the law also stipulates that an LEA must base the reservations for children that are in those facilities, those kids that are neglect and delinquent. So I know some people think that facilities don't have homeless kids, but there are some children who are incarcerated or in those facilities that don't have legal guardians. So homeless funds can be allocated for some of their services as well. Okay, let's talk about our pots of money. Right now, we have our homeless 1 and 2. We have some people have the McKinney-Vento sub-grant. Please understand that your ARP homeless 1 and 2, the obligation deadline is September 30th, okay? The liquidation, meaning it has to be drawn down by December 29, 2024, okay? If you have the McKinney-Vento sub-grant, then of course you know that's a year-to-year thing, and it has to be obligated by September 30th, 2024. And these funds do not carry over. There won't be a carryover. I know we had the luxury of having some carryover as long as we had those COVID funds, ARP 1 and 2, but that's gone away. So we have to kiss that goodbye. Okay, if you are a part of the advisory committee, please stand, and I want you to give our members a hand if you're part of the State Homeless Advisory Committee. So these colleagues, we met at Lake Gunnersville in February, I think February 1st, and we had some extensive conversations about the homeless rubric and about the homeless application, because in some regard it is a little confusing for those who do try to applicate. So we want to propose some changes. However, these are just proposals. It don't just happen like that. And one of the things, some of the things that we want to talk about that you may see in the next RFP, okay, we will continue using our 4-tier because we don't want to just over award. We want to make sure there's enough for everyone that's part of the this part of the state that wants to get those funds. Okay, now, if you've not looked at the needs assessment or the ranking in the application, there is a section that allows you to rank your needs. And as we move forward, when we start ranking the needs, the readers are going to look more at the needs of the budget amount being aligned to the need. For example, if you say mental health is #1 on your list, that's a big need. Well, when the readers start to read the application, they're looking for most of the allocations, most of the description being towards mental health. So just have that in the back of your mind. Make sure you understand that more attention will be paid to how the needs are ranked. and how those budget amounts are aligned to those needs, okay? Okay, another area that we're proposing to change or make some changes to is in the application. One of the things, there's a question in the application. It says, how is this grant supported by your LEA? Describe the joint planning that occurs, include CIP alignment information. Well, you know, people get very creative. They write that in the narrative. They have, yeah, we align this to the ACIP, but going forward, we need to see the evidence of the identified school that you're aligning the needs to. And I'm not certain if it's going to be an upload or a one-sheeter or an excerpt from that particular school's ACIP. But that means that, you know, sometimes I know ACIPs are done after, you know, you all apply for the grant. So that means there has to be some joint planning in order to get this particular part of the application completed. Also, there's going to be some changes or some talk of some changes to the partnership. When we get the application, there's a whole list of partnership. Our partnership with United Way, our partner with DHR, all of those things. Well, we're going to ask, or we're proposing to ask for 2 pieces of evidence in the form of uploaded letters from those partners talking about how they plan to help you with the sustainability. What does the partnership entail? How deep is the partnership, okay? So we will be talking about adding those things in our next upcoming grant cycle. Okay, there was also another question. I think there was a question about evidence-based research, and that, you know, been told me it was just a lot of fluff. So we're going to look at what is evidence-based research, and is it really connected to the homeless needs, okay? So you'll be hearing more about that. Now, as far as the rubric, these are just the highlighted areas that we want to talk about, or that we're proposing to make some changes. We're looking at the details more closely. I've mentioned the community partnership, the evidence-based practices, and how we evaluate. You know, we use that template, but does that template really, really connect to those needs and those key strategies? So don't be surprised if we ask for a little bit more, because as our funds go away, we realize that the competition is going to get a lot stiffer, and there's going to be a lot more people applying for those funds because ARP 1 and 2 will no longer be in existence. So make sure you read your application. You know, I know sometimes we could copy and paste because it's pretty much true when you're talking about uniforms, materials, and supplies, but just make sure you are answering those questions in the RFP. Okay, that's all I have. Do we have any questions in the chat? Any questions from the floor?